UFC Vegas 59 betting and DraftKings show. We got 12 fights this Saturday. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the women's bantamweight division, we have Stephanie Egger, a small favorite at -120. The comeback on Mayra Bueno Silva is +100. And this one is interesting right off the bat for DraftKings because you have Stephanie Egger, who's now the small favorite, but she opened up as an underdog. So she's actually $200 cheaper than Mayra Bueno Silva on DraftKings. She's only $8K. Bueno Silva 8,200. So these are spots where I'm always going to be interested in the leverage that it provides because everybody's going to see the line value in Stephanie Egger in that mid-range, and she's going to be pretty popular at 8K, whereas Mayra Bueno Silva, I think, is going to be one of the lowest owned fighters on this 12-fight slate. So if you want to take a high leverage approach and go overweight Silva, I don't hate that, especially in large field tournaments like the main $18 on DraftKings. But in terms of the matchup, I do think Stephanie Egger is going to have a clear positional grappling edge against Mayra Bueno Silva. She comes from a high-level judo background. If she's able to get inside, clinch up, land a couple takedowns, I do think she can control Bueno Silva in those grappling exchanges. Silva is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but we've seen she's able to be taken down and she can be controlled. Outside of her throwing up an armbar from her back, you know, that's how most of her submission victories have come, and they've come against a lot lower level grapplers than that of Stephanie Egger, who does have a background in Jiu-Jitsu. I mentioned the judo background as well. The problem with Egger and why I didn't end up betting Egger even at plus money this week is because I think she's going to be at a clear striking disadvantage here. Her striking is not great, very low volume, very awkward. I think Bueno Silva is going to have a clear power advantage. She does hit hard, even though she's not the highest fight IQ. She can hit hard. She can make it close. Like, I didn't really like the game plan of a couple of her last fights where I thought she could have clearly won those fights and made them a little bit closer than they needed to be. But in terms of the stand-up, if she can keep the fight on the feet, I think she is the better striker here. But I just don't trust her to do that. So the pick is going to be Egger via, positional grappling for the most part. I don't think she gets a finish, so I'd say Egger by decision. But in terms of DraftKings, again, I'm just going to take the high leverage approach and be overweight to this fight in general, but likely 2 times the field on the Bueno Silva side. And up next, we have another women's fight. This one's in the strawweight division. We have McKenna coming in as a sizable favorite at -225. The comeback on Miranda Granger is +190. And this one is for me, it comes down to, can Miranda Granger keep this fight on the feet? Because in theory, you would think that there could be value on the underdog here potentially, with Miranda Granger being the much bigger fighter. She's going to have a 10-inch reach advantage. She's much taller, more UFC experience as well. There's a lot of reasons why, in theory, you would think there's value on the underdog here. The problem is, even though Granger, I do expect to be the better striker, McKenna, not much of a striker. Miranda Granger does have a decent technical boxing game. She just doesn't let her hands go. She averages around 2 significant strikes per minute. That volume is just not going to do it for us, especially if you're not going to proactively look to grapple. And her grappling is really not there either defensively. She was taken down multiple times by Ashley Yoder. She was controlled for over half that fight as well. She's coming off a sizable layoff. I believe she is a newly mother, so shout out to her. But in terms of the matchup, I just think McKenna is going to be able to land those takedowns, and I don't trust Miranda Granger to be able to work back to her feet and make McKenna pay while the fight does play out on the feet. So even though I want to think there's value on the underdog here, I just can't get there from a betting perspective. I expect McKenna to do her usual song and dance. I mentioned the striking is not great, but I'd expect her to close that distance, get inside, land takedowns, and really wear on Miranda Granger, who I think is probably the lesser of the grappler of these two women. So give me McKenna by decision. In terms of DraftKings, I don't love McKenna by any means because she's pretty expensive on this slate. And Miranda Granger, like I said, I just don't think has much of a ceiling. So it's mostly going to be a pass, but I am going to have at least a little bit of exposure to McKenna just because, in theory, she's a big favorite who does have a pretty decent grappling edge, and I think could land multiple takedowns here. So you can't completely write her off in that expensive 9K range. So this one for me, in terms of DraftKings, I'm definitely going to have more of the favorite in McKenna. And up next, we have Josh Quinlan coming in as a -215 favorite. The comeback on Jason Witt is 185. And this one, I've done a lot of research on Josh Quinlan because he previously fought on Dana White Contender Series last season. For those that don't know, I do a lot of work on the Contender Series stuff. You can check that out on my YouTube page. If you don't already do so, definitely have a lot of fun with that product, and I appreciate any and all support there. But in terms of this matchup, I think Josh Quinlan is just, it comes down to the power and of Quinlan and the durability issue of Jason Witt here, because Quinlan, 5-0 prospect. I know he had the no contest on Contenders, knocked out a guy on short notice, ended up failing a drug test basically, and was suspended by USADA for like 9 months. So this is him coming off of that suspension, but I just think it's a really favorable matchup for him. Outside of the power that he does have, it's not like he's this insane one-punch power guy, but he does have pretty sharp boxing. He's got some powerful leg kicks as well, and Jason Witt has just been hurt in every single fight. He's been knocked out like 6 times in his career, and even when he's not getting completely knocked out, he just keeps getting hurt. So even if I think Witt might be able to have a little bit of wrestling success early in this fight, I don't think he's a big threat to finish while he's on top. And anytime this fight plays out in space, I think it's only going to take 1 or 2 combinations before Quinlan hurts and tests the chin of Jason Witt here and puts him out. So the last thing I'll say is I love this fight for DraftKings. I think everybody's going to, but at 8,600, Quinlan is one of my favorite plays on the slate. We'll get to Terrence McKinney later, who I'm sure is going to be everybody's favorite play on this slate, mine as well. But Josh Quinlan's right up there with him. Jason Witt, I mentioned the durability issues. He's actually, shout out to Kyle Marley. I went on the DFS Army podcast last night. It's on their YouTube if you haven't watched it. But Kyle pointed out that Witt has actually given up the 60-second first round knockout bonus on DraftKings twice already since that scoring change. We don't see that very often. Of course, we saw it last week with Sergey Pavlovich against Derek Lewis in what was a perfectly fine stoppage, if you ask me, when Derek Lewis face planted on the ground after not responding to punches for several combinations. I don't care that they weren't landing. The uppercut landed, and the way that he fell, any good ref is going to see that and get him out of there. So anyway, obviously we saw the first round knockout bonus on Pavlovich. We don't see that very often. We do see that often in Jason Witt fights, and I think there's potential to see that here in Josh Quinlan. So I think the ceiling is clearly there at 8,600. So he's going to be a heavy target for me, and I don't even mind the price. Like minus 215. I know he's a Contender Series big favorite, coming off a finish, UFC debut. Like those things always kind of scream red flags. But I just think the matchup is so good for him here. So give me Quinlan by knockout. That's the official pick on Saturday. Next fight up, we have Bryan Battle coming in as a big favorite at minus 245. They come back on Takashi Sato is plus 205. And I was never a big Bryan Battle guy. Like even on The Ultimate Fighter, I didn't think the guy was very good. Obviously, you saw the improvements he made throughout the show and since then as well. Like his last time out against Tresean Gore, it's kind of funny because Gore was landing the more impactful shots. He just wasn't letting his hands go enough, like very low volume, talking more worried about talking smack than he was to put more volume out there. If you have that much energy and breath in your lungs to be able to talk that much during the rounds, then you should have enough energy to throw more volume, and he simply didn't do that. So Bryan Battle, even though he had to walk through fire and eat a lot of big shots there, he was just doing more. He won those rounds on pure output, and that's basically what you can say about him, is like he's pretty well-rounded. He's solid wherever the fight goes. I don't think he's great in any one particular area. I think his grappling's pretty solid. He does have the ability to land takedowns. His striking's not great. He's usually a step behind against good strikers. But against Takashi Sato here, Sato's always been just a one-dimensional power puncher, a guy that has to win by knockout, and his defensive grappling has always been the biggest issue in his career. I'm not even sure his durability is all that great on the feet anyway, but his defensive grappling, clear hole that he just hasn't been able to shore up. 3 of his 5 professional losses have come by submission. Cash big on the Miguel Baeza submission prop at 12-1 back in the day. Shout out to Jonah, that was an FTN special back in the day on that one. So, but yeah, I mean, anyway, I just think Sato, one-dimensional power puncher, and Bryan Battle has proven that he can take a big shot. He's very durable. I'd expect him to be the one with more output here, getting the fight to the mat, landing takedowns, and really dominating once it does get down there. So give me Bryan Battle. Bryan Battle by submission, we'll say, just because I think if he does get enough top time and if he does grapple enough here, then I think he's going to have more than one opportunity to submit Takashi Sato. So Bryan Battle by submission is the official pick. I don't love his DraftKings upside just because he's not really somebody that I think scores super well in terms of the style that he typically fights with. But again, sizable favorite, potential to land multiple takedowns, and a pretty big grappling edge. So I don't hate the play either. I'm probably going to look to be about field average. But again, I really like Josh Quinlan's upside in that range as well. Next fight up, we have the biggest favorite on the card, Terrence McKinney, minus 850. The comeback on Eric Gonzalez is plus 600. And obviously at this point, you know what to expect from Terrence McKinney. Everybody loves Terrence McKinney fights. He's never in a boring fight. That last fight against Drew Dober in March, absolute fireworks, came shot out of a cannon and really put it on Drew Dober, which was very impressive. Even though he didn't get the finish, you know, there was multiple times where it looked like he was going to get the finish, but even though he didn't get the finish, that was very impressive what he was able to do against Drew Dober, not just in the grappling and with the ground game, but on the feet. Like, he landed some heavy shots early in that fight. And in this matchup against Eric Gonzalez, Gonzalez is basically a finisher by nature himself. A lot of his wins come inside the distance, and when he doesn't get those wins, he's typically being finished. You know, being knocked out by Jim Miller is not a great look for him in the second round of his last fight. And now going up against a guy who is super powerful, who does have a nasty high kick. He can land big punches as well. He can take this guy down and submit him. Terrence McKinney not only is the biggest favorite on the card, not only has the biggest inside distance line of the card, he's more than minus 200 to finish inside of round one. So even though he's the most expensive fighter at 9,500, I'm okay with getting overweight to Terrence McKinney just because the round one equity is so high. And like, there's a real possibility he scores 130 points here. So I'll let other people try to get cute. I'm okay with loading up on McKinney on this 12-fight slate and just trying to differentiate elsewhere in my lineups. If you want to get crazy and YOLO just lock button Terrence McKinney, I honestly don't think that's a bad strategy this weekend. And up next, we have another big favorite, Michael Olejksiejczuk, a minus 600 favorite. The comeback on Sam Alvey is plus 450. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this fight because I think it's going to play out like basically all of Sam Alvey's fights play out. I'd expect him to be backed up against the fence, looking to counter, looking to land his powerful left hand or the check right hook that he has. Like, he does have power. He can land some shots on the counter, but outside of him being able to really put somebody out with one of those strikes, I just don't think he can win rounds consistently, especially not at this stage in his career. You know, over his last 8 fights, he doesn't even have a win. Nobody really knows why he keeps getting fights, but supposedly this is the last one. I certainly hope so, because I don't think they're that exciting of a fight, even though his last couple have been a little bit better, a little bit more action. So hopefully he's willing to get aggressive here and go to war with Olejksiejczuk. But I just think Olejksiejczuk's a better boxer. He's going to pour the volume on Sam Alvey. So I'd expect him to back him up against the fence, land punches in volume, and I actually think he's got a solid chance to finish here. His inside distance line is not bad, but I actually think Alvey, you know, yes, the chin's starting to go a little bit, but historically he's been a very durable guy, and I don't think Olejksiejczuk has really, like, he's always been a volume type of puncher, like not really a one-hitter quitter type of guy. So I actually think this could go the full 15 minutes, and if that's the case, I don't love Olejksiejczuk at his price. I'd rather target fighters around him above 9K on DraftKings. So I'll say Olejksiejczuk by decision is the official pick. I wouldn't be shocked if he did get a knockout. It's just that at his price, it really needs to be a round one knockout for the most part. And I don't really see that happening against Sam Alvey here. So we'll go with Olejksiejczuk, but in terms of DraftKings, I'm probably going to be underweight to this fight on both sides. Next fight up, we have Ariana Lipsky, a minus 175 favorite. The comeback on Priscilla Cachoeira is plus 150. And this is a fight that I do have some interest in. You know, a lot of times these women fights just don't get as much buzz. They don't get as much ownership on DraftKings. This is one that I do want to have ownership on both sides, really, because I could see both of them having some sort of a ceiling here. The price on either is not that bad. I think if Lipsky were to grapple here, she could clearly cover this betting line here. The problem is she just never does, right? Like, she landed one takedown in her UFC debut, has not landed one since. Obviously did get the submission victory over Luana Carolina with that knee bar, which was great, but outside of that, like, she doesn't really proactively look to grapple. So I really just expect to see a striking match here. And where I have concern with that on the Lipsky side is because, yes, I think she's more technical, she's more polished on the feet than Priscilla Cachoeira, but Cachoeira is going to throw heavies in there for 15 minutes. Cachoeira is willing to eat 1 or 2 shots and just give you one of her power shots back in return. And I know that Cachoeira can take those power shots from Lipsky. I'm not convinced that Lipsky could take the power shots from Cachoeira. Lipsky's been knocked out 3 times in her career. She's honestly been rocked a couple times as well. Like, I kind of think she's a little bit chinny here, and that's where I have concern seeing her as a pretty big favorite here. So I'm going to have exposure to both sides on the off chance that maybe Lipsky grapples here, where I think she could dominate Cachoeira on the mat. But I think I'm going to be much more exposed to Cachoeira because I just think the ceiling is so clear. You know, in a win, she probably knocks Lipsky out. And I just think that this is a 12-fight slate. There's not a ton of underdogs that we really love this week. This is one where I can definitely see the ceiling winning by knockout. And honestly, like, even in a decision, like, I don't think she's putting up a bad score if no other underdogs come through at her price. So give me Cachoeira in terms of DraftKings. I think the most likely outcome is Lipsky probably just outpoints her to a decision, but I'm going to just take the approach of basically being heavier on the Cachoeira side and hoping that she wins by knockout. Next fight up in the heavyweight division, we have Sergey Spivak, a minus 245 favorite. The comeback on Augusto Sakai is plus 205. And this one, I just think Spivak clearly is going to have an edge in terms of the ground game. So it really comes down to if Sakai can keep the fight standing. He's a much better striker. He does have a decent jab. He's going to throw a lot more volume on the feet as well. But I don't really think Sakai has the typical heavyweight power, right? Like, the way that Spivak loses is generally to guys that are very, very athletic and have that one-punch power. He lost to Tom Aspinall. He got knocked out by Walt Harris back in the day as well. If he's able to get his grappling going, I just don't see how Sakai beats him here. Sakai only defends takedowns at 68%. I think Spivak is going to strike with him just long enough to be able to mix in those takedowns, get him against the fence, peel him to the ground, and really just dominate him on the mat. I don't think Sakai's grappling is all that great defensively, and I think Spivak could land multiple takedowns here and even potentially get a finish on the mat. Sakai, over the course of his career, was known as a very durable guy, and now he's basically on a 3-fight losing streak, all 3 coming by knockout. So if Spivak is down there on top of him for like 10, 12 minutes and just raining ground and pound, hunting for subs, I think he could get him out of there. So I don't hate Spivak on DraftKings. He's a decent play on DraftKings, and I actually don't mind the price either in terms of the betting line. I'm probably going to have a Juice Boy parlay this week. I know a lot of you guys love the Juice Boy parlays that I put out on Twitter at Jon Kelly DFS, and he's probably going to be in it this week in Sergey Spivak. We have the first of the 2 Ultimate Fighter finale fights here. We have Juliana Miller, a minus 120 favorite. The comeback on Brogan Walker is plus 100, and I honestly don't think either of these fighters are very good, but I was really uninspired on the Brogan Walker side just because I don't think that she really has much going for her, especially like at 34 years old. I think her best days are probably behind her. She does have a win over Miranda Maverick on the regional scene years ago. She has a loss to Pearl Gonzalez, a loss to Erin Blanchfield. She's an okay striker. She does have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I actually favor the grappling of Juliana Miller here. Miller, much more inexperienced. She's only 2-1 professionally. She lost to Claire Guthrie on the regional scene. Got that win back in the Ultimate Fighter house. They fought, and she ended up beating her by decision. Won another fight by Kimura. She is a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I just think the ability to just be super aggressive in getting it to the mat and then also having decent submission grappling as well, I do favor her in terms of the grappling, despite Walker having a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I think Walker would have the clear striking advantage. But I don't know if she's going to be able to, like, even though I think she has a striking advantage, I don't think she's going to blow out Miller on the feet, especially when Miller's going to be the one that's much more aggressive in moving forward. Like, I really was not impressed by Walker really whatsoever in any area. And it's not that I was super impressed with Miller, but at the low levels of WMMA, I'm almost always going to be leaning towards the side that I know is at least going to be the more aggressive side, and that's what I keep going back to. I don't know if she'll be able to land takedowns for 3 rounds here. Walker does have decent takedown defense, but I do think just the overall aggressiveness, combination of the jiu-jitsu along with hopefully the ability to land a couple takedowns here, I got to go with the Miller side. And which brings us to the other Ultimate Fighter finale. We have Zach Pagua going up against Muhammad Usman. Muhammad Usman is the younger brother of Kamaru Usman. These guys fought on the Ultimate Fighter, and now they're going to face off in the finale. I really don't think either guy's very good. Zach Pagua is a little bit undersized for the weight class. He trains at Elevation Fight Team, 5-0 prospect. He's pretty good striker. there's not a whole lot of substance to his game, at least from what I've seen on tape in the few fights that I did watch. You know, he's definitely going to have a striking edge, and he's definitely going to have a cardio edge. Those things I'm pretty confident on. Outside of that, I really don't think this guy's all that impressive. So seeing him as a pretty big favorite here is kind of concerning. And then you look at the Usman side, well, first thing that jumps off the page is clearly he's not his brother, right? Like the skill set, much to a lower degree than his brother Kamaru Usman, the welterweight champion, obviously. But Usman, I think, is going to be a lot bigger. He's like 6'4", going to be a lot wider in there. Definitely has a power advantage, I'd say. His striking is not great. His cardio is not great. He's kind of tailed off in fights before on the regional scene. And even in the Ultimate Fighter house, like I don't think he was really, all that impressive. I do think he could land takedowns here. And I do think just being the overall more powerful fighter, bigger guy, those things have me interested just on DraftKings because, again, there's not a lot of underdogs that we love this week. So I'm okay with taking a high variance approach in what's a low-level fight, in my opinion, where I'm not super sold on the big favorite here, so I might as well just be overweight to the guy who's going to be a lot less owned, who does have some athletic advantages, and maybe he can pull out the finish or just wrestle heavy decision. I'm not super confident that either of those things happen. Like I said, I don't even think Usman is that good, but I'm okay with taking that risky approach on DraftKings just because I like the price, and I'm hoping he can pull off the upset. Which brings us to our co-main event. We have Vicente Luque coming in as a minus 180 favorite. The comeback on Jeff Hands of Steel Neal is plus 155. And this one I think is going to be a banger. I'm definitely excited for the co-main event here. Vicente Luque is another guy that's never really in boring fights. Even the last fight against Belal Muhammad, I know it wasn't like super exciting, but I do think that was more on the Muhammad side, not the Luque side. He spent a lot of time defensively wrestling there and really just couldn't pull it off. But in this fight, I think he's the one with the grappling edge. I don't trust him to go to that because he basically never does. He's a guy that is a good grappler, but loves to slug it out on the feet, and that's what I'd expect here against Jeff Neal, who's basically a one-dimensional striker as well. Doesn't have much in terms of the grappling, but he does have a decent jab. He's got power in his hands as well. And Luque, while he has been impressive, he also eats a lot of shots. So it's like I'm not all that confident in Luque. I do think Luque wins. I'm not betting Vicente Luque here. I do think he wins, but in terms of DraftKings, again, I'm okay with having more exposure to the underdog just because one of these underdogs is going to be the one that break the slate, potentially two of them. So I'm basically just like, I'm pretty keyed in on the fighters that I like in the expensive range, whether it's Terrence McKinney, I mentioned a little bit of Sergey Spivak, Jamal Hill in the main event at 9K, Josh Quinlan, 8,600. Like those are all good targets on the expensive side. And then on the cheap side, I'm basically just mixing in the underdogs with Cachoeira, Usman, Jeff Neal. Like that's kind of the way that I'm playing it this weekend. And that's what I'm doing in the co-main event. It's like I'm going to have a little bit of exposure to Vicente Luque, but I'm also probably going to be heavier on Jeff Neal and just hope that he's the guy that pulls off the upset, assuming that I come in over the field on DraftKings. And in the main event, now we have Jamal Hill, a minus 275 favorite. The comeback on Thiago Santos is plus 230. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. I think most of us expect Jamal Hill to win this fight and probably by knockout. It's just that I don't think Thiago Santos at this stage in his career, I think he's more of a name than he is an actual like real contender. I just don't see it. Like the volume's clearly not there ever since he's never really been a high volume guy, but really ever since the John Jones fight where he tore both of his knees, had multiple injuries there, the volume has just fallen off a cliff. He still does possess that one punch power, but outside of that, like I don't see how he consistently wins rounds. I think Jamal Hill's much faster, better footwork, more power over 5 rounds if it goes that far, and I don't really think it does. I think Jamal Hill has the power, has the speed, has the durability, and really the volume to just get Thiago Santos out of there in probably one of the middle rounds. So I like Jamal Hill to get it done by knockout. I don't even hate parlaying him, even though it's a little bit of risk just because it is, the light heavyweight division. These guys are bigger. They're swinging heavies in there. Thiago Santos does still have power, but I just really think that this one is Jamal Hill's fight to lose here, and I don't think he does. So give me Jamal Hill by knockout. That's the official pick, and he's another strong target on DraftKings as well. And as always, guys, I'm going to have DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. I'm going to have ownership projections. I'm going to have MMA line movement, fantasy points per minute, all on my website, fightnumbers.com. It's completely free. Go check it out. Let me know what you think, and appreciate you watching. Hit that like button, drop a comment for me, and subscribe to my channel as I continue to bring you more UFC content each and every week. Best of luck, and we will see you next time.